my 30 years as a doctor in this hospital, you can imagine that I have seen all kinds of things. Patients fighting for their lives and others who no longer wanted to live. I saw violent families demanding that we do something more to save their family members, and people completely abandoned. Being a doctor is a difficult job, and only experience prepares you to be one. But there was a time when nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. Something so strange and out of this world, I can't put into words. That day, I saw evil in its purest state right in its eyes, and it looked back at me. It all started with a patient who had arrived a few days before. She was in intensive care, getting better. The day she was brought in, she had a lot of bruises and fractures in her body. Initially, we thought she had suffered domestic violence, but she was not in a relationship, and when a neighbor told the police about the noises, they found her at home with the door closed, alone. Maybe when she woke up, she was going to give us the answers to so many questions that we had been developing during these days. At that time, I can't say that I was an experienced doctor, but with a little more than 5 years of experience, I could say that I knew my way around the hospital. And that's why I can say that one day when I was doing night rounds at the hospital, I saw something that I don't think many other doctors have seen. I was in the room with one of my patients behind me. I had the strange sensation that someone had walked down the hallway. Hello, is somebody there? Hey. Did you see someone behind me? I'm the only doctor around.
Lo he visto. Era un demonio. Te estaba mirando.
Sorry, I don't speak Spanish.
A demon. Demon behind.
What? Did he just say there was a demon behind me? That was weird. The man only had a broken leg and even thought I understood half of what he said. We had a talk a few seconds ago and he seemed in his senses. Now, he just seemed bothered. Like he saw the face of the devil itself behind me. I have to admit, that really scared me.
Demon, don't go. It was a demon. Red eyes and smile.
Hey, take it easy. It could be a lost patient. I have to check it out. Be right back, okay? And just like that, I left my patient. I ran quickly to the door, but when I saw the hallway, it was empty. Maybe he was gone. It may seem illogical, but I felt that something bad was happening. It was something I couldn't see or put into words, but it was as real as anything you are seeing right now. The hallway filled with an almost Gaelic code. I felt the urge to leave, but I couldn't do it. I felt that someone was in danger and that I had to do something. I started to walk down the hallway, and the code was getting more and more intense. I resisted my impulse to leave as fast as I can and kept walking until I reached the girl's room. Her door was open and her lights were on. I had a troubling feeling about her. I felt she was in danger, so I tried to enter her room, but something didn't want me to. The door slammed violently in my face. Was that the wind? No, impossible. There are no windows open and the whole movement was way too violent. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The girl woke up screaming in terror. Her eyes were wide open. She began to inspect her surroundings, lost. Suddenly, she saw something that terrified her. What was there? I couldn't see a thing. The girl got out of bed and tried to run, but she didn't know she was in a cast, so she fell to the floor. Meanwhile, I was pounding on the door as hard as I could. It was as if the weak bedroom doors were suddenly reinforced. The woman crawled against the wall, away from someone I couldn't see, but it was there. The girl began to feel pressure on her neck, and stuck against the wall, she was floating. She was fighting for her life, fighting to breathe. From behind the door, I could see how her arms and legs were breaking on their own, and from one second to the next, her neck snapped. The girl fell lifeless to the floor. The door to her room opened, and I rushed in. I stared in disbelief at what had happened. She was dead. This wasn't an accident or suicide. Somebody actually killed her. This didn't make any sense, and I refused to believe that there was something paranormal happening. But suddenly, I felt someone behind me. When I turned around, I saw it. A black figure more than 2 meters tall was staring at me. Its body was slender but imposing, and its eyes were red with the most intense fire I had ever seen in my life. I closed my eyes in disbelief, and when I opened them again, there was no one there. At that moment, I felt someone grab me by the neck and throw me against the wall of the hallway. I tried to get up, but the invisible being kicked me in the face and started stepping on my face as if I were a cockroach. I stood up and ran as fast as I could. As I did so, I heard mocking laughter from behind me, slowly fading into the echo of the huge hospital. It was never determined what had happened to the girl. The footage had disappeared, and although I was a suspect for a short time, the police concluded that I had nothing to do with it. I never saw anything remotely paranormal in the hospital again, but there is not a night that goes by that I don't hear that laughter in the hospital. That mocking, provocative laugh sounds like a reminder that I couldn't save that girl that day. Have you ever been treated by a bad doctor? You know, those doctors who don't care about you. Those few doctors who are tired of people and just want to go home. Every time I think back to that day, I think that I would have preferred to be treated by one of these doctors. I would have preferred to see anyone other than the one I saw. It all started when I was 18 years old. It was a very immature time for me. I was too young and innocent to be able to fend for myself, but too old and rebellious to let my parents interfere with my life. We went to the hospital for a sinus infection, and when it was my turn to go to the doctor's office, I insisted on going in alone. When I entered the office, the doctor was waiting for me behind his desk. At that point, neither I nor my parents had seen the signs. We didn't notice that the doctor's voice signaling for the next patient to come in was different. We didn't notice that the previous patient had never left the office before I was called in. And we definitely didn't notice the doctor locked the door when I walked in. After entering, he asked me what was wrong with me, why I was there. He didn't look like a doctor. He was unalienated, nervous, and even seemed quite angry. His voice was impatient and shaky, but it felt like he was holding back the anger in his eyes. He told me to lie down on the bed. He grabbed one of those little sticks used to check the throat, but without warning, he shoved it in violently into my nose. The man squeezed harder and harder as if amused by what he was doing. Scared, I pushed him away. "Hey man, what's your problem, man?" "Relax, young boy. I understand the procedure might be quite painful, but no mistakes. It is normal." "That can't be normal. This is the first time I heard about this procedure." "That is because this is a new procedure. Are you questioning a doctor, kid? Do you think you know more than me?" I guess I don't. Sorry. I overreacted. That hurted." "Just go back to your seat. You will feel better after this." At that point, I should have left. I should have screamed. I saw his psychotic eyes. I saw his macabre smile, but still, I trusted him. I sat back down, asking him not to use those sticks anymore. He started massaging my forehead to see if it hurt, a typical sinusitis procedure to see if I had mucus on my forehead. Everything was starting to go normal, but the procedure the man was applying on my forehead was getting stronger and stronger. I begged him to stop, that it hurt, but he wouldn't. He just increased the pressure more and more, slowly directing it toward my eyes instead of my forehead. I tried to pull his hands away and kick him, but nothing worked. It was as if he was totally fixed on hurting me. I screamed as loud as I could, and with all of my strength, I gave him one last kick that threw him into a locker. "Hey, what is happening? Open the door. What are you doing to our son?" My parents were trying to ram the door without success, while I watched the doctor recovering from the impact. The locker was still closed, but the impact shook it a little, and blood began to flow from its openings. There was a corpse inside the locker. At my discovery, he just grinned even bigger. from ear to ear and walked in my direction, pulling a scalpel out of his pocket. I heard more and more voices on the other side, but the door was very solid and would not open. The doctor was almost beside me. I had to do something. I gathered all the energy I had and tried to ram him, but it backfired as he gave me a violent blow that knocked me backwards. He just kept approaching me as if nothing had happened, with that terrifying and maniacal smile.
What are you doing? You're not a doctor, are you? Why are you doing this to me?
I may not be licensed, but I know my medicine. I may not have the best intentions, but I consider myself a doctor. You know you came in here feeling bad, but when I'm done with you, you won't feel bad anymore. You won't feel anything.
Why?
Why? You're asking me why? Because it's fucking funny. The blood, the pain that you trusted me. I'm having the time of my life. Once he said this, the man lunged at me with the scalpel. I had to think fast and did the only thing I could think of. I used all my energy to throw myself out of the second floor window. As I fell, I felt the glass cutting through my body, but I felt no pain, only adrenaline and fear. The fall took forever, and as I kept falling, I saw the psychopath behind me. He had also jumped? Maybe he was hallucinating. As soon as I reached the bottom, I only remember an impact and suddenly darkness. I woke up in the hospital bed with a broken leg. My parents received me crying and told me everything that happened. Once I jumped out the window, the man jumped behind me with an uncontrollable thirst for blood. Unfortunately for him, he fell very badly, and even though it wasn't that big of a fall, he didn't survive. When the police inspected the office, they found the body of the real doctor in the locker. That was not my doctor, but a patient who had taken his place. My leg may have recovered, but in my head, I could never get over what happened. Every time I go to the hospital, I'm terrified of who might treat me. That psychopath may be dead, but in my head, he is more alive than ever.
For the past 7 months, I've been working at a local hospital. I live in a town that was made for a retirement community. So, we hardly have young people here, let alone kids. If you are not familiar with a retirement community town, it's basically a town established for people to settle down after retirement. Most of the people you will see around the town are elderly. And naturally, the hospital, too, is filled with elderly patients who are sick and need constant medical attention. Being a nurse was always my dream, but never in a million years did I expect myself to be a nurse in a hospital with so many old people. Recently, a new lady had been admitted to our hospital. She had been in and out of the hospital for the past several years. Given her age and her illness, the doctors have decided to admit her for a long time now. Her name is Mrs. Francine, and she is the sweetest woman you will ever meet. Although she has dementia and trouble talking and remembering things, she always greets me with a lovely smile and a "How are you doing, dear?" every time I go to her hospital room to check on her. Sometimes when she is doing okay, she makes me sit beside her bed and she tells me stories about her kids and grandkids. It's very entertaining to listen to stories from the 50s and 80s. In our hospital, instead of having fixed staff for the day and the night shifts, we all rotate our shifts. This means once a week, each nurse and doctor will have to do the night shift. Truth be told, I do not hate the night shift. The quiet in the hospital is a bit weird, but apart from that, it's peaceful. All you must do is take a round after every 2 hours and make sure all the patients are comfortable and sleeping. Mrs. Francine has a corner room, which means she has a great view of the lake beside our hospital. Although she is old, she gets out of bed on her own and sits in a chair watching the lake through her window. Many a time, she did it at night, too. I always made sure that she was in bed at night. However, the other night when I was on my round, I saw an old man exiting Mrs. Francine's hospital room. The visiting hours had ended a long time before, and that old man just casually walked out of her room, as if he had been doing it for ages. I immediately went into Mrs. Francine's room and found her awake with a smile on her face.
Mrs. Francine, who was that man? I saw him just walk out of your room.
Oh, dearie, it was my husband. He comes to visit me often.
That's nice, Mrs. Francine, but would you mind asking him to come during the visiting hours?
Oh, I sure will, my dear.
A part of me knew that she would not remember that her husband had come to visit her tomorrow, but I still wanted her to know that any kind of family visits are not allowed so late into the night. The next couple of days, I had the morning shift and completely forgot about Mr. Francine visiting so late. The next time when I had the night shift, I saw Mr. Francine leave his wife's hospital room again late at night. That time, however, I decided to confront him myself. So I started walking, and the moment I turned into the hallway he had just walked into, it was completely empty. There was no one there. It was weird that an old man could walk so fast. Instead of looking for him, I visited Mrs. Francine in her room, but she was fast asleep. Not wanting to wake her up, I planned on informing the head nurse about the matter in the morning. The next day, I found the head nurse Jennifer grabbing a cup of coffee in the cafeteria.
Hey, Jen, you got a second? I need to talk to you.
Sure, Linda. What is it?
So you know Mrs. Francine, the woman who has the corner room, right?
Yeah, she is such a sweetheart.
Last night when I was on my night shift, her husband came to visit her around 2 a.m., and that is not the first time that it happened. I saw him leave her room at night on my last night shift as well. I tried to confront him myself the second time, but he had walked away. Would you mind stepping in? It would be great if you could talk to him and stop the late night shift visits, or at least tell the security at the gate to not let him in so late.
As I was talking, Jennifer was sipping her coffee, and her face was growing concerned with every word. Honey, I think you need to take a seat for this.
Why? What happened?
Do you know how old Mrs. Francine is?
No, maybe 90?
That woman is 102 years old, the oldest in this hospital, hell, probably in this town. Her husband, Mr. Francine, died 30 years ago. He was 77 or something. I don't know who you saw coming out of her room, but I'm sure it wasn't her husband. Now, I'll get back to work. Oh, and many of Mrs. Francine's relatives live in Europe or in a different state, so none of her relatives visit her. And I'm sure the staff or the security are not letting any outsiders in at night. Jennifer's words stunned me. So instead, I directly went to Mrs. Francine's room.
Oh, dearie, you're back.
Looked like she was having one of her good days, which meant I could talk to her.
Mrs. Francine, do you mind me asking you a few questions?
Not at all. Go on.
Where is your husband?
Oh, Martin, the love of my life. I had 5 lovely kids with him. Unfortunately, he left me a while ago. He passed away.
That information hit me hard, but I continued.
So who visits you at night?
Visits me at night? No one visits me at night, dearie, except the nurses and doctors.
The other night I saw an old man leave your room at around 2 a.m. You told me he was your husband and that he visits you sometimes.
To that, she opened the door of her bedside table and pulled out a crumbled picture. It was a black and white picture of a family. She passed the picture to me, and when I looked closer, it was Mrs. Francine standing in the middle with 5 little children around her, and beside her stood a tall man. He was Mrs. Francine's husband, Martin. I kept staring at the picture. It must have been taken sometime in the 40s, and the more I stared at the man, the more he looked like the younger version of the man who visited Mrs. Francine. That's when it hit me. I had seen a ghost of Mr. Francine on my night shifts. It spooked me so much that I returned the photo to her. Suddenly, Mrs. Francine looked at something behind me and said,
I'll see you soon, dear. Now our wait is over.
I looked behind me and there was no one there. I left her room shortly, more spooked than ever, but her last statement stuck with me. Exactly 24 hours later, she passed in her sleep. I still work in that hospital, and a new patient has moved into her room. Since her passing, I haven't seen that old man during my night shifts. Before taking your leave, I just have one question. Do people visit their loved ones from the beyond?